So good morning, everybody. I hope you're all well. Obviously, the ongoing events in Israel and Gaza preempted everything else that I plan to address. So today we're going to try and understand how the October 7 massive incursion by Hamas operatives on Israeli soil could take place, and what are at first glance the consequences of such a brazen and bloody attack for the region and beyond. I'll try to assess all this, even though, as you very easily understand, it is much too early to reach any definitive conclusions, since the events are still very much unfolding on the ground. Therefore, the comments and observations that I'll be making today are just that, comments and observations, with more thorough and informed analysis following as more information is made available to us on what is already considered the worst day in Israel's 75 years of existence, including the blunder of the 1973 Yom Kippur War, almost exactly 50 years ago, when Israel was also caught unprepared by a surprise attack from Egypt and Syria at the time. Today, Israeli observers compare the Hamas intrusion to the tragic events of 9/11 and the attacks on American soil, as well as the 1941 Pearl Harbor Japanese attack combined, with the most Jewish victims in one day since the Holocaust. Indeed, the Hamas attack of 10 days ago was not the usual and occasional Hamas-Israel military confrontation. This time, we have witnessed a massive invasion by a couple of thousands of Hamas militants all along the Gaza-Israel border of 37 miles long. And it's map number 1, Michelle, please. As you know, probably know, after crossing the border, the terrorists fanned out across the area, reaching 22 Israeli locations, villages, rural communities, or kibbutzim, and even small towns like Sderot, as far as 15 miles inside Israel. Using rudimentary equipment like bulldozers, gliders, mopeds, pickup trucks, golf cars, and small boats, they not only crossed into Israel, but overwhelmed the undermanned Israeli monitoring stations, and they started to slaughter everybody inside and take hostages, Israeli and foreign, back to Gaza across the same border, marked by a barrier that reportedly cost over $1 billion. So you see here the Gaza Strip. Up north, you have the Eretz between on the border between Israel and Gaza up north. You have the Eretz checkpoint, and down south on the Egyptian side, you have the Rafah checkpoint. And this is important, and I'll tell you why in a while. Now, you see also almost all of the localities which the Hamas send its fighters They are in red. And they went as far as Ofakim here on the right-hand side, my right-hand side, on the map, which was, again, like 20 miles, 15, 20 miles inside Israel. They also send boats and small vessels to Zikim, which is also up there north on the left, my left, also on the map, within Israel. Now, why was this intrusion successful? Unlike previous attempts by the Islamic group to penetrate Israel defenses? The answer is relatively simple. Hamas learned from its previous mistakes. It used tactics to test the readiness of the Israel's defense forces, or IDF, that it never used before. For example, the IDF were used to be subjected to rocket fires without border riots, or the other way around, to border riots without rocket fires. They were also used to see small groups of sea commandos trying to invade Israeli beaches, like here in Zikim. They were also used to handle and destroy dozens of drones or other flying objects at one time. But not this time. This time, Hamas used the same methods, but in much larger numbers and in perfect coordination. This time, Hamas fired thousands, not dozens, of rockets at one time. It sent an entire fleet of motorized hang gliders, difficult to detect, which manually dropped bombs on Israeli lookout positions to disable them. With the lookout position taken out, it sent thousands of fighters, not small groups, across the border to different crossing locations, as you can see here on the map. At the same time, Hamas landed by boat many naval commandos, not just a few, and additional troops through dozens of tunnels the Israeli army had failed to detect. All of this happened virtually simultaneously, yet in a specific order to allow each next step to move forward smoothly and further confuse and overwhelm Israeli defenses about where and what was going on. When planning the invasion, Hamas seems to have taken a page right out of the playbook of Al-Qaeda that has confused the US on 9/11 by attacking not one, but several targets in a coordinated fashion, both, as you know, the Twin Towers in New York and two targets in Washington, the Pentagon, and a fourth target that was never reached because the passengers crashed the plane. Such a plan has a name. It is called overloading the systems. It also did not help that 1 or 2 dozens of IDF battalions that should have been deployed around Gaza were stuck in the West Bank, dealing with an 18-month terror wave there, and that the reserve's readiness has taken a hit in recent months during debates over the judicial overhaul. You remember we addressed this issue not long ago. Finally, the country had its guard down for the Jewish holiday of Simchat Torah that fell on a Sabbath. Now, had Israel had its air power and advanced land vehicles and tanks assembled for a fight, it would have countered relatively easily Hamas's attack. But by the time the IDF forces were ready and sent out to Gaza, Hamas fighters had reached many rural communities, border villages, and even urban areas, as well as thousands of young people attending an international rave music concert that happened to be held close to the border, shooting everybody inside and taking hostages, as I said, back to Gaza. Now, let's see what's behind this level of incredible unpreparedness displayed by the Israeli intelligence agencies and the army, both considered among the best in the world. There are basically two major reasons that prevented Israel from recognizing and forestalling what it should have seen and countered. The first is military. Israel's prevailing military thinking lately has been that by appeasing Hamas, the Islamic organization would eventually grow out of its jihadist origin. The military operation conducted by Israel in Gaza, the previous ones, had been mostly directed at the Islamic Jihad, which is a smaller Iranian proxy organization, sparing Hamas, the ruling party in Gaza, despite its tens of thousands of missiles and elite commando units. During that period, Israeli military officers spent their time explaining that Hamas was deterred from fighting Israel because of its previous setbacks, that Hamas was not interested in a full-on escalation, instead focusing on reinforcing its position as a legitimate government of Gaza. Taking advantage of such an unexpected respite, Hamas devoted most of its energies and resources provided for humanitarian purposes by the United Nations, the European Union, and the United States to digging tunnels into Israel and building rockets, thus depriving Gazans of any chance to build Gaza into a productive society with decent schools, universities, and infrastructure that might have been a model for a future Palestinian state with a West Bank. But that was never Hamas's agenda. The second reason is related to purely domestic policies. We have seen over the past years, and God knows if we spend a lot of time on it with every Israeli elections, we saw Israel dissolve a government after government, held inconclusive elections after inconclusive elections, and addressed all questions of identity, religious affiliation, ethnicity, class, and privilege in an increasingly partisan way that turned Israelis not against terrorists, but against each other. Also, Netanyahu's insistence on implementing a judicial overhaul to strip the Israeli Supreme Court of its power to oversee his government, and incidentally to obstruct the course of justice in order to avert his own trial for breach of trust and fraud, fractured Israeli society to the point where all bets were off and nothing was sacred, including the one untouchable idea of shirking reserve duty in the army, as I mentioned earlier. All these internal crises projected an image of weakness and division that Hamas was naturally tempted to exploit. The ramification of October 7 and its aftermath will be far-reaching and take a long time to manifest. Down the road, obviously, there will be commissions of inquiry into the major failure of the military and intelligence agencies. The political echelon won't escape blame either, including Netanyahu himself, whose image as the ultimate defender of Israel and its people's security has been irrevocably tarnished, and whose political career might not survive this tragedy. But beyond the individual responsibilities, the sheer number of people massacred, injured, and taken hostage will undoubtedly have a huge impact on Israeli psyche for generations to come, shaking irreparably the public's confidence in their political leaders and their army's capacities. For now, however, the conflict has united people and politicians, as evidenced by the opposition leaders' decision to join an emergency government in Israel that Netanyahu called for last week. The military's immediate priority now, obviously, is to conduct the conduct of the war, which in itself involves excruciating decisions about trade-offs among deterrence, retaliation, recovery of hostages, and ground invasion. The lesson learned from the previous Israeli offensive on Gaza are not very encouraging. The enclave, roughly the size of Washington, D.C., is one of the most densely populated areas in the world, where 2.2 million people, largely sympathetic to Hamas, live with no place to go, and where previous Israeli incursions proved to be costly in men and material. That said, the barbarian nature of Hamas's brief invasion of southern Israel has been a game changer, giving Netanyahu no other choice but to send ground troops, not just to weaken the organization's military capabilities, as he had done on previous occasions, but this time to root out Hamas's very presence from the territory, no matter the cost. Such a mission, though, is fraught with danger. Not only the Israeli forces will be facing a fierce resistance from an enemy familiar with the terrain, who conceals himself in a maze of deep underground bomb-resistant tunnels full of booby traps that run all across Gaza. But they also have to operate keeping in mind the hostage situation that is liable to complicate, even curb their freedom of action. The importance of that issue, the hostages, that Israel attaches to this can be summarized in one number, one figure. In 2011, Netanyahu, who was already a prime minister at the time, traded over 1,000 Palestinian prisoners, some serving life sentences, to get one Israeli soldier back from Hamas in Gaza. This time, however, humanitarian considerations will take a backseat to Israel's security concerns. Since last week, power and water services to Gaza had been shut off, although the water supply seems to have been restored to some extent. Delivery of food and healthcare suspended, and the bombing of buildings suspected of storing Hamas's military material carried out without warning. As you know, in previous incursions, the Israeli army would drop flyers and make phone calls to the residents of the Gaza buildings that they intended to bomb, to get out of the building a few minutes before the bombing happened, so that to spare that population. Not this time, though. Furthermore, on Friday, order was given to some 1.1 million residents of northern Gaza, right here around the city of Gaza, to relocate within 24 hours to the south of the enclave. The deadline expired. Most Gazans have fled, but Israel decided to extend it to give time to Secretary Blinken's current mission in the region to convince the Egyptian government. Once again, the Rafah checkpoint is down south and it's controlled by the Egyptian forces, to convince the Egyptian governments to open that Rafah checkpoint, to let out or let into Egypt the Palestinian refugees, something that Egypt is reluctant to do. And to give time to Blinken to see with the Qatari government, which has friendly relation with the Hamas, to involve itself in the efforts to free the hostages. That said, already there have been massive demonstrations by pro-Palestinians and left-wing political movements in the region, including Morocco and Bahrain, that just established diplomatic relations with Israel, but also in Europe, Australia, and the United States. And these protests are expected to amplify as the bombing of Gaza and the evacuation campaign go on. But they are unlikely to shake Israel's resolve to put a permanent end to Hamas's damaging presence in Gaza. There are also three immediate consequences to these tragic events. The first one is a disruption for the foreseeable future of the recent diplomatic efforts by the Biden administration to facilitate a rapprochement between Israel and Saudi Arabia, to forge a broad alignment against Iran, and to prevent China from making further inroads into the region. Those efforts explain to a large extent the timing of the attack by Hamas that may have been encouraged by the Iranian government, which is an important backer of Hamas, in order to scuttle this process that obviously Tehran and its proxies view as a potentially damaging one to their regional interests. And I must say their calculations have proved successful. Within an hour of Hamas's incursion, a statement by the Saudi kingdom blamed Israel's occupation and its policies that, I quote, deprives the Palestinian people of their legitimate rights. And the Saudi government suspended its ongoing talks with the US on the normalization issue, which was expected to some extent, despite the relative lack of interest by the Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman to the Palestinian cause. But he couldn't do less at this time than link himself publicly to the Palestinian cause, for now anyway. The second consequence is a return to the front burner of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict that was deemed something of a secondary issue in the recent Israel-Arab diplomatic normalization. It is a reminder once again to all the actors that no lasting peace can be had in the Middle East without a resolution of that conflict. And finally, the Middle East developments may also impact Ukraine's Western financial and military backing, to the extent that an Israeli long war in Gaza could jeopardize the delivery of military hardware, missiles, artillery shells, and other basic armaments that Ukraine desperately needs more of, and Israel surely does too. President Putin has noticed. In comments made last week, he said, I quote, Ukraine is being propped up thanks to multi-billion donations that come each month. Just imagine that the aid stops tomorrow. Ukraine will live for only 1 week when they run out of ammo. And the European Union has openly acknowledged that fact, saying that if the US assistance to Ukraine were to diminish or stop, the Union would be unable to fill the gap. This highly volatile situation in Gaza makes us wonder today, what comes next? Could the enclave be turned into a zone of shared interest where Saudi Arabia, which has long distrusted Hamas's close military ties to Iran, Egypt, which sees Hamas as a Palestinian arm of the Muslim Brotherhood, which it ruthlessly suppresses at home, the US, which designates Hamas as a terrorist group, and Israel, which is trying to eradicate a mortal enemy, could all of these actors join efforts in helping the ailing Palestinian Authority that rules part of the West Bank to resume civil control over the Strip, with security furnished by peacekeepers from Arab states and economic aid from the Gulf states, Washington, and Brussels from the European Union. Obviously, such a move would give the PA the leadership over Gaza it has lacked for 16 years, would strengthen secular forces in Palestinian politics, and free Gazans from extremist tyranny. Or, on the contrary, would Iran and its regional proxies, including the powerful Hezbollah in Lebanon, whose reaction has been relatively muted up to now, but that might change, as well as the West Bank and even Israeli Arab community, could they all launch a new violent version of intifada or uprising and escalate the conflict? They may prompt intervention of outside actors. The increased presence of the US fleet in the Mediterranean may contribute to dissuade other actors from broadening the conflict in the region. But that is not a given. In a visit to Qatar, the Iranian foreign minister said yesterday that an Israeli ground operation in Gaza would represent a red line for Tehran, forcing it and its proxies, like Hezbollah, to intervene. Well, once again, it is much too soon to tell how these events are going to unfold, but not too soon to start thinking about how this disaster could have the best possible outcome, if there is such a thing. And now, before I finish and give you the floor for comments and questions, just a couple of words about Ukraine, obviously, which is conflict in Gaza has totally cut from relevance. And I realize that Ukraine is not on your mind right now. However, Ukraine is very much on the mind of President Zelensky, who went last week to see NATO defense ministers in Brussels, and that was his first known visit to NATO's headquarters, worried precisely that the war between Israel and Hamas will divert attention and needed weapons from Ukraine's war. And despite the assurances he received that another $2 billion in immediate military aid were forthcoming, Zelensky's visit highlights his concern that for Ukraine's that support for Ukraine's fight against Russia would never again be as high as it was a few months ago. He realizes that Ukraine is increasingly a divisive issue, not only in the United States, where the upcoming presidential campaign will highlight the opposition of the Republican Party, backed by increasingly larger segments of the public opinion, the opposition to unaccounted assistance to Kiev in view of the recent number of corruption scandals within Zelensky's government, but also in Europe, where the slow pace of the Ukrainian counteroffensive that implies for the Europeans also more military, economic, and humanitarian assistance against the prospect of potential shortages of gas and electricity for the second winter in a row. That question is more and more increasingly debated in the public opinions over there. Furthermore, on the ground, the Russian troops seem to have gone on one of their biggest military offensive in months around the eastern frontline town of Avdiivka. That's map number 3, Michel, whose capture would ease the way to nearby larger cities like Konstantinivka, and around Kupiansk, which is map number 4, another eastern town. This push indicates that Moscow believes that it can regain the initiative on the battlefield after resisting successfully the Ukrainian counteroffensive. So we'll see, again, it fell off the radar, the Ukrainian issue, but it seems that militarily, at least, the Russians have turned the tide and went on the offensive. So, okay, I cannot show you on Michel, if you have map numbers 3 and 4 ready, I just like to show them for a moment where the Russian pressure is applied on Ukrainian defenses, and then we move back on to your questions and comments. Okay, if we cannot have the maps, it's no big deal. Maybe we'll show them a little later. Okay, so I open the floor to, oh, here we go. Okay, you see here the regions of, this is a map from, as I always told you, I have a very hard time finding up-to-date maps. I don't know why, of Ukraine and where the actual current fighting take place. But anyway, you have the Luhansk and the Donetsk region here. And you also can see Avdiivka here in it's a red bullet here on my left, in the Donetsk region, which for the time being, it used to be in, you see a map from 2017. At the time it was Ukrainian, then the Russian took it over in 2014, I think. No, in 2021, and then the Ukrainian pushed back, and at the present time it's under Ukrainian control. But the Russians are pushing here, and that might open again the way to go further north towards Kharkiv. And the second map number 4, Michel, if you don't mind. That is also in the east, around the Kupiansk area. Thank you, Michel. Okay, now you have a better map here. These are in red, occupied by Russia. And Kupiansk, you can see here, it's closer to Kharkiv. It's the northeast. Also, it's part of Ukraine, reclaimed by Ukraine. Also, Kupiansk had been under Russian control since their invasion in 2021. And like in Izium, the Ukrainians took it back during last fall's offensive in this area. So now again, Kupiansk is under serious pressure from the Russians. So these are again the 4 annexed provinces: Donetsk, Luhansk, Zaporozhye, and Kherson, here down south, with Crimea also annexed. So basically, that is the situation today on the front line. Okay, thank you, Michel. So back to your question and comments. There won't be many, I guess, on Ukraine. So
Hi.
Pierre,
Do you think? Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Okay, Pierre, I understand for Ukraine, the Wagner Group is back.
Sorry?
I understand the Wagner Group is back. There's a new leader of the Wagner Group. And
there is a new leader indeed of the
Wagner Group. And he's in Bakhmut.
Now, it's a question of how many return to fighting in Ukraine. Their number was around 35,000, 40,000 people. I think there are fewer, much fewer this time, because some of them went to Africa, and they are still there. 5,000 or 6,000 of them are in Mali, in the Central African Republic. And a number of them, again, several thousand of them, I don't know exactly how many. There are numbers going around 9,000 apparently, are in Belarus, around the Polish border. So, and indeed, some of the Wagner fighters seem to be back on the front line, but under Russia's command now. They were absorbed administratively, at least, in the Russian army. And even though they have a new commander, the new chief does not have the type of power and autonomy that Prigozhin did previously. He's a man of the Kremlin, first and foremost. So the Russian army and the high command keeps an eye of what they are doing exactly. Okay. Not an autonomous force any longer. They are part of the Russian army.
Thank you. They're in Bakhmut, I understand.
Apparently, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, because they know. So some of them fought around there, as you know,
right.
a number of months. So they are extremely familiar with terrain, and they are helping the Russian forces who are less familiar, who might be less in a position to keep Bakhmut under their control. So they need help from the Wagner forces, whatever Wagner forces are deployed in that area.
Thank you.
Okay.
So is it credible that Egypt did warn Netanyahu a few days before the attack?
That's a very good question. I cannot answer that question. The Egyptians say they did. Netanyahu and the Israelis say they didn't. There will be whether the truth will be revealed at some point. I have absolutely no idea. And if the Egyptians indeed they warned the Israelis, that might never come out. It will be Netanyahu's word against the Egyptians. So it's impossible to tell. Again, there will be, once the war is over, whenever that is, the truth might or might not come out. Whether Netanyahu knew about it, or maybe some high-ranking officials in the Israeli army knew about it. I cannot tell you at this. I don't know.
It may not have been believed. They have to see in Golda, the movie Golda about Moshe Dayan not believing the warnings. You
Yes.
don't know.
Well, you cannot always. Yeah, indeed, you're right. There are similarities between 1973 and 2013, but I don't know how far you can push those similarities. And at some point, does it really matter? What matters is that the Israeli intelligence services, agencies, and the army were caught unprepared, and that over 1,300 people, Israelis, died, and the number will still go up, obviously, since there are so many injured, with serious injuries. Most of them can be saved. Unfortunately, some of them will not. So that's what's the most important part. It's not so much whether they were forewarned or not. But at this point, I just don't have the answer.
Francine, unmute yourself.
Okay, the incursion of the Gaza forces into Israel was a declaration of war upon Israel, and I look at it no differently than Germany going into Poland or into Czechoslovakia or Japan going into Asia. There is, no matter what the political differences are, there was no excuse. They may rationalize, but there's no excuse for the armed forces going into villages and going into the music festival and so on. And I think it's abominable. And as I say, it doesn't matter whether I'm Jewish or I'm not Jewish. It's just a question of something. I think of it in terms of, well, supposing Canada or Mexico invaded us, and we wouldn't stand for it, and no nation would stand for it if they could possibly fight it back. And I think that's where you have to stand. It was a declaration of war.
Yes, except that it wasn't, well, you know, in previous conflicts that Israel had with its neighbors, and now I'm talking about interstate conflicts, okay? Not with a terrorist organization like Hamas, but I'm talking about the 1973 war, and I'm talking about the 1956 war, and the 56, and 67 and 73, when Israel fought with Egypt and Syria and Jordan and with other states. There was never a declaration of war. In 73, the Egyptian forces just crossed the Suez Canal without any warning. In 1967, without any type of warning, Israel bombed the Egyptian airfields and destroyed the Egyptian aircraft without any type of declaration of war. 56, the Suez crisis, the Suez Canal crisis, was the same thing. There was never a declaration of war. The war just broke out without any type of declaration. For instance, in 67, where you may remember Gamal Abdel Nasser, who was the president of Egypt, closed the Tiran Strait, which in itself, as far as Israel was concerned, was a declaration of war in itself. And not only that, but if you remember also, Nasser urged the UN peacekeepers deployed in that area, in the Sinai, to leave. And so that was considered by Israel at the time as a declaration of war, which in itself was not. But then they attacked Egypt preventively, so to speak. In 73, Sadat, in 73, the Egyptians took advantage of the Yom Kippur holiday for them to surprise the Israeli army at the time also. So there was never a declaration of war. So you cannot expect, and at that time, there were states fighting states. This time you have a terrorist organization that invaded a state. If in previous instances there was no declaration of war, you cannot expect a declaration of war from a terrorist organization. They will just do what they are trained to do, which is spread terror, and that's exactly what they wanted to do. They knew that it's no way that they can win against the Israeli army, and it took the Israeli forces
Surprise.
3, 4, 5, 6 hours to get ready and come. During this interval, unfortunately, what happened. Okay, but you cannot expect a terrorist organization to declare war on a state. They do what they do best.
Yeah, it's terror.
That terror, exactly. That's what they learned. That's what they've been brainwashed over years to do.
Yeah, it's now 5 generations, if you're thinking about it.
Well,
just about.
Yeah, but
since the founding of Israel. But I mean, you can have people that are 70 in their older, and then all the 20 years keep on going down. You have 5 generations of people that have been fed the line and believe the line, and have. I mean, I'm not saying they don't have gripes and they aren't right in some respects and whatever. It's just that the idea is to eliminate the state of Israel. But I do have some other comments. The front page of the New York Times yesterday, on the right-hand side, had a large spread that Gaza had the information, they had maps, they had the layout, they knew where where everything was and how they could go in very easily, and that was found by Israel. And as I say, there was a little picture of the map that they had. So that's one thing. So I'm questioning the intel and whether or not it was. And I hate to think of somebody who has come in, a Bedouin or an Arab or whatever, that fed them the information as to where the armed forces were, how strong they were, where their armaments were. That's one question. And the other question is, how is it possible, and that's a rhetorical question, how is it possible that they got all those arms if there are embargoes in Egypt and embargoes in Israel, and they know what's coming on? Supposedly they hear the conversations and they have all of this intelligence, and yet they had all of these mortars and all of these weapons, and as well as this well-coordinated plan. And I have to say it was a very clever plan, diabolical, but clever.
Well, it worked out very well for them. Now, to answer your first question, I don't know if there is a connection, but I believe there is, or there might be. And again, we'll find out the facts as we go along. About a month ago, in order to placate to some extent the Gaza population and Hamas, which is ruling them, Israel issued 15,000 additional permits to Gazans to come into Israel. You know, every day there are several thousand Gazans who come into Israel to work in construction or whatever. Okay. Now it happened. Israel granted 15,000 additional permits to Gazans to come on a daily basis to work. Amongst those 15,000, apparently, a few spies slipped into Israel, and somehow they succeeded in taking back to Gaza and in reporting to the Hamas leadership about the location, if you will, of the Israeli control towers and the monitoring towers, which remotely monitored the border, the directed border there. So to some extent, they were informed by those informants, maybe. But again, Israel has informants in Gaza, so the Hamas did the same thing, unfortunately, and it worked in Israel. This is the first answer that I might have. The second one is how is it that Hamas had so many weapons? First of all, they made them of, apparently, the Israelis found out that the water pipes that run under Gaza, Hamas removed them and made rockets out of those pipes.
So should we feel sorry that they don't have water? Should we say that
that's another? Okay. Well, I'm not going to go there. Yeah. But I'm just telling you, you asked a question. Yeah.
So the other thing that really bothered me is that they used funds or whatever to make these armaments.
Absolutely.
But they didn't use funds to shore up the hospitals and the centers for feeding. They didn't provide food and water and antibiotics and so on for the population. And to me, that in itself is a crime.
Well, Diane, you have to understand something. Hamas's agenda, they don't care about the Palestinian people per se. They are not there to defend the Palestinian people, even though their propaganda is that. They are there, and it's clear. I mean, it's publicly stated to destroy Israel. So the two are not related on their minds. It's not by making the Palestinian people, giving them a better life, that they would advance, if you will, to some kind of possible peace in the future. It's destroying Israel, and that's the only goal of Hamas from the very beginning.
Yeah, I agree with you there, but I'm saying that in all the war preparations that they didn't include the need of hospitals for supplies, and I mean even for their own injured and whatever they don't
Absolutely.
have so
Absolutely.
that's inhumane also aside from everything else.
I want to
Listen, back in, I'm going to finish answering the question, then I take the next one. From the very first moment, in 2004, when Sharon gave back to the Palestinians, not to Hamas, but they gave Gaza back to the Palestinians because Israel didn't want to. Israel, as you know, took over Gaza after the 1967 war. And they returned the Sinai Peninsula to the Egyptians, and then they returned Gaza, which again is, Israel didn't want to really control Gaza necessarily for longer than necessary. So in 2004, Sharon returned Gaza to when there was some peace negotiation with the PLO and Arafat. He returned Gaza to the Palestinians by telling them, listen, we give you a piece of land here. You can run it yourself. We don't get involved anymore. This is your piece of land. And show us that you can run it in such a way, help these people who live here, the 2 million plus people who live in Gaza, to have a better life, develop their economy. We Israelis are going to help you develop these areas, buy your agricultural products, have trade with you, help you with your fishing industry and all that thing. And then show us that you can run this place on your own peacefully, so that eventually the West Bank will see also how you develop, how nicely you're developing, and maybe in the future, without mentioning any date, of course, in the future, you'll be a model to the West Bank, and eventually you can, aspire to a state, independent state next to us. And you know what happened after that? There were elections in Gaza.
Right, and the PLO lost.
And the PLO lost against Hamas.
Right.
They went to war against Hamas. PLO was kicked out of Gaza, and Hamas took over. And instead of, again, like you said, trying to develop that area with all the monies coming in, not from Israel anymore, because if you have in your charter the fact that you do not recognize Israel and you want to destroy it, that's your main goal, and there will never be peace. And the best Hamas offered the Israelis was a 30-year truce. They said, let's have a 30-year truce. There will be no bombing, but 30 years from now, the truce expires. So the Israelis said, and then what? They said, well, we'll see later. But basically, that would give 30 years to
develop.
To get stronger.
To develop.
So Israel said, no deal, okay? It's either peace with you, with Hamas, or nothing at all. So Israel stopped helping them, even though they supplied the area in electricity, water, everything, but the other Arab countries from the Gulf area, particularly Qatar,
Jordan and other countries,
and the EU and the US and the United States through the UN Agency for Palestinian Refugees gave huge amounts of money to Gaza to help the population there. Well, that money was taken by Hamas
Us
for
and
the
used-
purposes basically the purposes that we discussed. So this is a history, if you will, of Hamas nowadays, and the Israeli Hamas issue. So these are your two questions. Yes, something else?
It's
There are more, but
mind-boggling.
other people want to talk.
Yes.
Oh. Yeah.
Yes.
I was going to say it's mind-boggling that the Israelis had no idea of what they were doing in Gaza in preparation, because they claimed they were doing preparations for the last 2 years for this attack. And they had miniature cities set up to demonstrate how to do it and stuff.
Didn't they have
I mean,
satellites to see these things?
Sorry, did they? I didn't. There was a question. Did you?
No.
Did they? What?
Fran, we didn't hear you.
Okay, the
I said,
Israelis.
didn't they have satellites to see what was going on? That's so
Yeah.
disturbing.
I guess not. I guess not. Again, as I tried to explain in my presentation, for the Israeli High Command, the thinking was that Hamas, after all these mini wars conducting in Israel, the last one, if you remember, was only 3 years ago, in 2020. That Hamas was in no mood to fight, and that for the time being, they have been talking about elections with the PLO in the West Bank, and they were focusing more on how to consolidate, strengthen their power in Gaza, rather than turn on Israel. This is one of the reasons also why Israel granted 15,000 working permits to Gazans a few months ago, to make the economic situation of the people there easier, to help them financially. So whether satellites, you have to understand also that everything that Hamas has been doing for a number of years, and the Israelis saw that in previous incursions, is done underground. So it's very difficult to tell what they are doing and where they are doing. And generally speaking, they do it underground, under schools and under mosques, and under civilian and under residents. So it is very difficult to know exactly what they are doing and where.
But they were doing it above ground, because there was photos on television of many areas that they had set up to train to invade. And they set it up to look like where they were.
Yes, and I think the Israelis saw it, but they said, well, they are just training. They'll never do it for real. They are just training, that they've been training all this time, but after all these setbacks they had against the Israelis and all these hundreds of people who died and infrastructure destroyed, they are in no mood for fighting. They are wrong. The assessment was wrong.
Expensive one.
Except that there is one thing with Israel, unlike any other country in the world, Israel is not in a position to lose a war. Other countries can lose wars, and okay, they lose a little bit, like, I don't know, Ukraine being invaded by Russia. They could lose a part of territory, but still be Ukraine as a state, okay? In this particular case, in Israel, whose very existence is challenged by the region, basically, which finds its presence in the middle of 500 million Arabs there, and political anomaly, which was put there by Western powers because those Western powers felt guilty about what happened to the Jews, European Jews mostly, in World War II. They were put there artificially, and they do not belong to the area. And I believe that if you ask most Palestinians in the street how they feel about it, and they speak to you openly and honestly, that's how they feel. Mm-hmm. So Israel cannot lose a war, because if Israel loses a war, Israel is finished as a state. Unlike any other, any other state. And this is also why Israel, since 1948, since its creation, Israel has won all the battles against its enemies, but never won the war, because its allies never let Israel go all the way. Right. They always stop them, the Western powers, because of their own public opinion, because of pressure put on them from other Arab countries, because
geopolitical also, oil.
Because of, I was going to say, because of economic and financial interest. So Israel was always stopped. In 1956, Eisenhower told the Brits, the French, and the Israelis, return. Don't go any further. Don't take over the Suez Canal. Return it to the Egyptians. In 1967, Israel could have gotten even further. They stopped the Jordan River. And they retook Jerusalem. But the Palestinians stayed in the West Bank. In 1973, they just defended themselves, and probably when Sharon's army crossed the Suez Canal again, chasing the Egyptians from the Sinai Peninsula, the Western powers told the Israelis, stop, don't go into Cairo. And the Israelis stopped about 60 or 70 miles from Cairo. And it's all these mini wars with Hezbollah in Lebanon or with Hamas in Gaza. Israel was never allowed to destroy Hamas or the Hezbollah. The Hezbollah, because the French oppose it. The French, as you know, Lebanon used to be a French
colony
territory. Not colony, real, but it was for a long time protector, exactly, under French control. And Hamas, because of the Arab states, which obviously financially represented a big deal for the Western countries. So Israel always stopped, and they could have probably taken out Hamas many times before. But Netanyahu never did, because, again, all this pressure on him from his allies. We're going to see how it goes this time. I'm still not convinced, even though the Israelis resolved this time, is now we're going to go in, because the atrocities that were committed there will really allow us to go in, and this is our duty, to go in and destroy Hamas once for all. I'm still not sure. Let's see what happens when indeed Israel goes into Gaza. Because I expect pressure on Israel, as Israel is trying to destroy the Palestinian, the Hamas. I expect that the pressure and public opinions in other countries will come out against Israel, forgetting very conveniently what happened on October 7th. I hope I'm wrong, but I don't know.
I think you're right,
I'm not
unfortunately.
100% sure that even the United States will be behind Israel all the way for as long as it takes. We'll see.
I have one other question. Do you have any idea why Reuters came out at about 1 o'clock this morning that there was a peace agreement, that they were going to stop fighting as of that time, 6 o'clock in Israel time? That was announced on the BBC, and when Israeli army officials and Hamas officials said no, that's not true, but it was announced for about an hour at different times during that program.
What I do know,
I can jump in here. I've been watching CNN, and there's horrific fighting going on between Israel and Gaza and the Hamas.
what
And-
I do know to answer your question is that the United Nations Security Council met a couple of times in the past couple of days, and on Friday, the Russians came up with a text, with a resolution, asking for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza. And the number of countries which are, Iran also, a number of countries which are friendly to Hamas, obviously, as Israel is poised to go into Gaza, are coming up with this resolutions for a immediate ceasefire, which obviously would benefit Hamas. So today, apparently, there are two Security Council resolutions on the table. One from Russia, and the second one apparently is from Brazil. And the second one is also calling for the first one, the Russian one, doesn't even call Hamas by its name. It says there should be a ceasefire to spare the Palestinian population in Gaza, and which condemns terrorist attacks and attacks on both sides. So that it doesn't single, if you will, it doesn't single out Hamas. The Brazilian draft resolution does single out Hamas as a Islamic. I don't think they use the word terrorist, but it also calls for a ceasefire. Obviously, the United States will oppose its veto, so none of this resolution has any, and the UK, probably the French also. So there is no chance for any of those resolutions to pass. But that being said, as I told you, as we go further and further, we go on, you can see all these initiatives, so-called peace initiative, by a number of countries friendly to Hamas and the Palestinians, come up with, again, this type of resolutions in the Security Council, which obviously, once again, like in all the previous conflicts between the Palestinians and Israel, calls when the tide turns, they call for Security Council for a ceasefire, for a ceasefire. But again, this will have no chance of going through, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Pierre?
Yes, there is a question here. Yes.
It's Sherry.
Yes, Sherry.
Can I ask a question?
Go ahead. Go
Okay,
ahead.
go ahead.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
One thing you haven't discussed is the unity government that supposedly has now formed in Israel, bringing in Gantz and Lapid, I believe. But I don't really
Lieberman.
understand.
And Lieberman.
And Lieberman, okay. I don't really understand in what way that changes. I mean, Smotrich and Ben-Gvir are still part of the government. They have not, I've not heard anything that they are not. How does this impact what is going on? I mean, what are the implications of this new unity government?
The only implication, Sherry, is that it is what it is, a unity government. And it wants to show the population in Israel that the politicians are united for the time being. It doesn't go any further, okay? Because now what you have in the government is basically two chiefs of staff, Gantz, the former one, and Gallant, which is the Minister of Defense in Israel. So obviously they'll be working together, obviously, but they would have worked together no matter what, even if the politician from the opposition had not joined the government. But joining the government just wants to show the international public opinion to some extent, and also the Israeli population, that no matter who was at fault for what happened 10 days ago, the politicians are united. But needless to say, this union would last only the time, exactly, it will last exactly the time of the war. Once the war is over, needless to say that it will break up and the opposition will hold Netanyahu and the rest of the government accountable for what happened. And maybe it cannot be ruled out that new election, but again, this is down the road, okay? For the time being, what the politicians wanted to show, obviously when Netanyahu saw what's going on, he said, well, I want to get some cover from the opposition, so I called them into the government. I want them to join me into the government, to take some responsibility, not necessarily for what took place, but what is going to unfold. And obviously, the opposition could have said, it's your fault, we're not going to participate. But then the Israeli public would not have understood that in a moment like this, in a crisis like this, the opposition would say no, we say no to the government. So it's a country's existence in a way which is at stake. So it is bigger than bickering taking place between the two, between the opposition and Netanyahu. So the opposition has decided to join the government, but it doesn't mean anything. You're right. I mean, it doesn't mean anything. It's a temporary union that will break up as soon as the war is over, and fingers will be pointed at each other. We'll see.
It's like 9/11. It was the same.
Sorry?
And after 9/11, the country came together here.
Yes.
Yeah, same.
But this is before. I mean, Israel hasn't yet gone into Gaza, so they needed to show that everybody's united. And obviously, Sherry, as you saw, there are a number of reservists, Israeli, who had left the country and who immediately came back, forgetting about their threat not to, to shirk. In a moment like this, you forget the small domestic issues and concentrate on saving your country. So,
Pierre?
Yes.
Has there been any early evidence that Hassam that the terrorists had used artificial intelligence to surprise Israel, and therefore it was much worse because they did use artificial intelligence to deceive Israeli surveillance?
No, I have no information. No, I have no information of that. I don't know.
Okay.
So I don't want to, make suppositions and assumptions which are not founded. I don't know.
Right.
I guess if nobody's going to ask, I'll ask about the hostages. I mean, it's a terrible situation. They seized so many people. They seized elderly people. They seized babies. And how does anybody even know where they are if they're still alive? I mean, how do they extract them? I mean, it's unthinkable.
Well, there about now. The number has risen. You might have
Yes.
seen this morning.
Yes.
It was around 200, not 150 anymore. Some of them were already killed, as you know. The Hamas said they were killed by Israeli bombing, but there are 13 or 14 which were already killed. And the Israeli army did not invade Gaza yet officially, but they are incursioned by special forces by Israelis. So it seems that they found some bodies of hostages already in Gaza. Again, whether they found them in the rubbles of buildings or otherwise, that we don't have this information. But about 13 or 14 were found. Now, once again, as I said in my presentation, obviously for Israel, it's very important to try and get back at these people. That being said, I'm afraid that this time, when again the first mission of the army sent into Gaza is to destroy Hamas, no matter what. I don't see a negotiating outcome to this, because for the Hamas fighters or the Hamas command that holds these hostages, what interest do they have to negotiate, knowing that perfectly well that they will die no matter what, even if they negotiate, even if they let them go, the hostages? Israel will kill, the army will kill them, because that's their main mission, is to kill them. The second point is that when previously Israel went into Gaza, they cleaned, if you will, they destroyed Hamas's infrastructure in Gaza, and they pulled back. And at the time, Gaza, the Hamas held 2 or 3 Israeli soldiers or civilians, and then they said, we'll exchange them against Palestinians held in prison, which they did. Okay, in this particular instance, that will not be the case, because Israel will not pull out. At least that's the official line for the time being in Israel. Israel will not pull out as long as they have not destroyed and rooted out Hamas. So that goes much further than just going in, weakening Hamas, and pulling out, and then exchanging prisoners. This time, there will be no exchange of anything. They will be going in, destroying Hamas, whatever the cost, and then coming back at some point, which might take, again, weeks, months, nobody knows. Whether this is how this whole scenario will unfold, that very much remains to be seen. But this is the idea at this point today, as we talk. Which means, to go back to your question, the fate of the hostages is sealed, okay? Again, I hope I'm wrong, but as far as I can see, I don't see any way out for the hostages. No matter what the involvement of Qatar is, no matter how much pressure the Western countries are putting on Egypt, which has been the traditional mediator, as you know, between the Palestinians and Israel. Today, Israel's priority number one is root out Hamas in Gaza. And that is not compatible, if you will, with an exchange of prisoners. There will be no exchange of prisoners. And the Israeli public opinion will not understand, after what happened on October 7th, the Israelis will mourn the people, but I believe that this resolve is unshakable at this time because they went too far. So I think that the hostage situation is, again, if Israel does exactly what it intends to do or what it says it will do, it is not compatible, if you will, with exchange of prisoners there.
So
and
the hostage.
I don't know what the Palestinians or the Hamas would be able. I mean, what Israel would be able to offer the Palestinians. There will be no offer or exchange or negotiation. Israel would say basically, let them go, and then we kill you. Because that's what we come to do here in Gaza. Let them go, morally. But then there is no sparing of your, you will be killed. Now, will Hamas listen to that? I mean, after what they did 10 days ago, I have doubts. I don't know. But again, as we sit here today and we talk about it, that's my point of view. And again, I hope, Sherry, I'm wrong.
It just sounds like the point of seizing the hostages was simply to further terrorize, and with that was totally the point. And there was no thought given to, there could be an exchange. I mean,
I don't know what they went through their mind. I believe that, once again, considering that they exchanged prisoners 1,000 to 1 back in 2011, they might have believed that, this was going to be like on the previous occasions. We seize a number of people because they happen to be here. And then we take them with us, and then they could have killed them. That's another thing. That's why I believe that they still, the logic, if there is any logic in Hamas's thinking, was we kill a number of people, but we take also a number of people with us so that we can later exchange them for Palestinian prisoners in the Israeli jails. Otherwise, they would have killed these people as well. They wouldn't have taken any hostages. Some of them probably they took them as human shield, and some of them for a later exchange. But this time there will be no later exchange. This time it will be their destruction. So if you're going to kill them anyway, unless the Hamas has a revelation and they decide to let these people go who are, from 9-month-old babies to 85-year-old women, what do you do? And they said, they even said, listen, with every bombing of a building, as you know, by the Israelis, we kill one hostage at the time, with every bombing without warning. Because now they're getting upset. Obviously, the Israelis are bombing now mosques and schools where they know that underground Hamas has some military infrastructure hidden there. So that upset Hamas because obviously now those places are being destroyed, and that infrastructure, whether before they can move out some of it because they had a warning. This time there is no warning. So if they say we're going to kill one hostage every hour, it means that they don't really care about the hostages in particular, but that at the end of the day, they still might be able to make some exchange and to get something out of an exchange. But this time Israel said, listen, we're coming in to destroy you. So I don't know what, when you hear, all these politicians saying we take the hostages' fate into account and we do everything possible to free them. I don't know what this everything possible is, considering how Israel is planning its campaign in Gaza. Again, hopefully I'm wrong. All right. If there are no more comments or questions, we'll see how next week goes and what new news we'll have.
Oh, thank you very much for this discussion of this incredibly important subject.
Again, Diane, it was very difficult to put all this information together, in such a relatively short time, because again, what I'm giving you today is really what happened and what the immediate consequences are. The long-term consequences, we still don't know because it's still unfolding. So we'll have a much clearer picture, if you will, by the time this war is over, one way or the other, and we'll be able, maybe in our classes in December, by end of November and early December, to have more definite conclusion at the time. But for now, it's just the facts and the immediate consequences as they change, obviously, from day to day and hour to hour. So anyway, thank you all for
thank you, Pierre. Thank you
today,
again.
and you're welcome. And then I'll see you. You see all of a sudden how, in a way, everything is relative. All of a sudden, Ukraine disappeared from the map, although there is intense fighting over there, and all our attention is today on Gaza and the Middle East.
And we have
But
also
as I always told you, the Middle East, even if we want to get away from the Middle East has always, unfortunately, a way of bringing us back to it, one way or the other. But I guess that has not and is not going to change in the near future. All right, so have a great week, all of you, and obviously you will be following the news, and we'll be taking this up again next Monday. Bye. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Michelle. See you all next Monday. Bye bye.